Business Unity South Africa is concerned about South Africa's trade status with the United States. The U.S. government is in the process of reviewing its African Growth and Opportunities Act, a trade agreement with countries on the continent. AGOA provides duty-free treatment to the goods of designated sub-Saharan African countries and promotes trade and investment between those nations and America. Laird Treiber is a U.S. and Africa trade expert, and he joins us now to take a look at these negotiations that are upcoming. Thank you very much, Laird, for your time this afternoon. Let's start by taking a look at AGOA and some of the benefits for the United States.
Sure. Well, thank you very much for having me on the program. It's a privilege to join you. The AGOA has had significant benefits over the last 23 years since its inception in 2000, both for Africa as well as for the United States. It's created hundreds of thousands of jobs in both the U.S. as well as in the United States, and has certainly afforded American consumers with a broad range of products at very competitive prices. And so it has been very much a win-win for both sides, and certainly something that I think a lot of people would like to see continue.
And that's just it. In whose interest that it continues? Because there's quite a bit of discomfort in South Africa from some sectors of society, especially because of the murmurings that we have been hearing from some political parties abroad about South Africa's position when it comes to the war in Ukraine. But is it as simple as that the United States will cut the ribbon because of that?
So I would suggest there's two broad issues. One is just AGOA all by itself is an interesting set of very important trade issues. And so the African Growth and Opportunity Act is actually a unilateral trade preference program from the United States government for sub-Saharan African countries. And it expires, its current authorization will expire in 2025. There's an active discussion ongoing in Washington now, realizing that it's absolutely critical for companies not to wait to the last minute. Companies need a clear signal in terms of continuing investment, continuing trade. And so ideally, AGOA would be renewed this year, that is to say 2023. And there's a clear sense, I think a clear consensus among parties that it would make sense to do it for a sustained period, so another 10 years, for instance, until 2035. There are some important issues in terms of renewing a trade authorization program in the current U.S. Congress. There are some important questions to answer. One of the questions, there's a clear sense that a number of parties would like to see perhaps some improvements made, and it could be along the lines of, for instance, AGOA currently only includes sub-Saharan Africa, while there's a recognition that the African Continental Free Trade Agreement includes all of Africa. There's a sense that finding some way to include North Africa would make sense. There's some important provisions that could be amended or improved that would make it easier to administer. There's also some important issues over graduation, as some countries look to be evolving enough, developing enough to get to the World Bank developed country status. So there's a number of those issues that are complicated enough on the trade side without introducing what I would say is a second basket of issues, and that's more of the foreign policy or kind of governance sets of issues. Just on that, so certainly I'm no longer in the U.S. government and can't speak for them, but there is no question that what has happened, or shall we say the relations between South Africa and Russia, have raised some issues in Washington. That's something I think personally is very important for the two countries to resolve in a political manner. But again, they are two separate baskets, the trade basket versus the political basket.
Absolutely. Just out of curiosity, what is it that Americans cannot do without that comes from this side of the world?
Well, so what I would suggest is there certainly are some important products that anything from South African oranges and wine to a wide range of transportation products, not just cars made in South Africa, but also other transportation parts, airline parts, things like that are all very important as part of the U.S. ecosystem. I would suggest it's less about what, shall we say, has happened to date and more about the potential. And what I would suggest is AGOA has been a really important opportunity that I would suggest has, in general, not been used to its full potential. But I think with Africa's really important moves to create a unified economic market under the Continental Free Trade Agreement, this is what's really going to start creating regional and continental value chains that I think for the first time will actually really create the synergies that AGOA had hoped to create earlier. And I think the point is there'll be significant opportunities for new products or products perhaps that are only made in Africa currently to also then enter value chains that go to the United States and vice versa. Usually trade begets investment, begets more trade, begets more investment. So I think the point is renewing AGOA now really will help AFCFTA realize its potential, and it's another case of a real potential for classic win-win.
Is that what you mean by AGOA has not been put to its full potential?
So the U.S. market is very large, very sophisticated, and it can be very hard to break into. You have to figure out the logistics chains and how to market to U.S. companies, let alone U.S. consumers, etc. And I think in 2000 there was a sense that opening, frankly, giving African countries, African companies, a very unique, very broad set of access would by itself lead to a lot more trade from Africa to the United States. I think, personally, it was perhaps underappreciated how difficult some of those non-tariff, there's certainly not a government policy that needs to be changed. It's just, it can be a hard nut for a mid-sized African company to suddenly tool up for a much bigger, much more sophisticated market. So I think on its own, I think the original framers of AGOA had hoped that we'd be times 10, times 20 levels of trade between the U.S. and Africa at this point. I think that moving forward, as I said, with AFCFTA, I think there'll be a lot more commercial viability in terms of actually reaching that potential.
Laird, Treiber, thank you very much for your time this afternoon.